Okay, welcome everyone. I'm sorry for this delay. There was a meeting of the board of the faculty, so it was unavoidable. I would like to welcome you all to the VersaHealth workshop, which is the part of the seed-funded project of the same name. My name is Aleksa Jovanovic, and joining me today are my colleagues from the University of Belgrade, Vladimir Nikolic, Ivana Nikolic, Andrija Pavlovic, as well as our two special guests, David L. from King's College London and Sofia Bauer from University of Vienna. The concept of this workshop is such that I will ask you to fill in the pre-test questionnaires prior to me explaining the significance of the name of the project and its aims. So you can do that by scanning this QR code, or alternatively, we have sent the link for the questionnaire to the email addresses you used for registration. And please, when you're filling in the pre-test questionnaire, use the same email that you have used for registration. This is important for certificate issuing. Okay, so 2 more minutes should be enough for everyone to finish the pre-test. Okay, so we will proceed on. Thank you so much for your patience and taking the time to fill in the questionnaire. This will be very valuable for us. And we will see in a couple of hours whether or not you agree with what you just said. So, first we need to decide to explain some basic concepts to give context to the entire project. So One Health encompasses human health, animal health, and environmental health, and its aim is to achieve optimal health for both animals, humans, and ecosystems. The key word here is collaboration. It is a very complex, multidisciplinary concept, and some of the challenges that it tackles are zoonotic diseases, antimicrobial resistance, and food safety. So this is One Health. And on the other hand, global health is slightly different. Its focus is not so much on the entire planet, but on health of humans, and more particularly on the reducing worldwide health disparities. This is the key moment in global health, and the key word here is equity. So some of the challenges that global health tackles are delivering healthcare in a conflict setting or expanding access to medicines. Now, finally, we can explain the name of the project. First, why is it called One Health or Many Health? We want to argue that although we are sharing the planet and sharing the challenges, these challenges are in different stages, in different geographic locations, and also they might require different solutions. So this is not only true if we compare the global north and global south, but also if we compare across a relatively small geographic region such as Europe. Why is a multicultural and a multidisciplinary approach needed? We have formatted this series to be a talks of lecturers from different disciplines and different cultures to show that perspective is key. Different perspective leads us to different conclusions, and we as a society need to find a way to integrate them into a whole. So the workshop is organized as 6 talks delivered by each one of us, and they will be divided into 2 groups, 3 talks, then a discussion, then the other 3 talks, and then the discussion. And we have now finished the introductory part, and I will proceed to give the lecture on the risk factor distribution across partner states. My background is in epidemiology. I have been working as a teaching assistant in the epidemiology department at the Institute of Epidemiology of the Faculty of Medicine since 2018, and my PhD thesis is on the prevalence and risk factors of familial multiple sclerosis. So I got the inspiration for this topic last year when I was working with colleagues from the vascular surgery department on a paper regarding screening of abdominal aortic aneurysm, or AAA, in Serbia. This was a pilot screening project in Serbia, so no such screening exists yet in Serbia. And we have discovered that the prevalence of AAA in Serbia is relatively high, which is not something that is in line with contemporary data from Europe. In Europe, it has been shown that the prevalence is low and falling. So what is the reason for this difference? One of the key reasons are the differences in risk factor profiles between different states in Europe, and namely smoking. So my focus in this topic will be on non-communicable diseases, and my colleague Vladimir will talk about communicable diseases in his talk. According to the World Health Organization, non-communicable diseases take the most lives worldwide, and we can see that cardiovascular diseases are the leading risk factor contributing to deaths, with almost 18 million deaths annually on a global scale from cardiovascular deaths. They are followed by cancers, chronic respiratory diseases, and diabetes. So what is the reason people get non-communicable diseases? This is because of risk factors. A risk factor is defined as any attribute, characteristic, or exposure of an individual that increases the likelihood of developing a disease or injury. These risk factors can be genetic, they can be physiological, environmental, or behavioral. And the one thing that we can influence the most is our behavior. And indeed, the WHO, the World Health Organization, states that 4 particular behaviors lead to 4 key metabolic and physiological changes that lead to most non-communicable diseases worldwide. If we take a look at what causes the most mortalities in the world on a global scale, we can see that the leading 3 top risk factors are high blood pressure, smoking, and high blood sugar. So this is on a global scale. But what about our partner countries? We can see that the top 3 risk factors in the partner countries are actually the same ones that are on a global scale. But there is a slight difference in ranking. If we take a look at the United Kingdom, smoking is ranked first, while smoking is ranked second in Austria and third in Serbia. So what does this mean? Does this mean that smoking is actually a larger problem in United Kingdom than in Serbia? Well, as you can see, this is actually not the case. While it is true that smoking is only ranked third in Serbia, this is only due to the fact that high blood sugar and especially high blood pressure cause even more mortality in Serbia. So if we compare, for example, the United Kingdom in Serbia, we can see that smoking in Serbia leads to as much mortality as smoking and high blood pressure in the United Kingdom combined. And this is also the case if we compare Serbia and Austria. So the comparing rankings across countries is not the ideal way to get the right conclusions. Seeing how very complex the issue of risk factors is, I will not attempt to dive into all perspectives, but will make a case study out of smoking because it can illustrate the point of my talk very effectively. In this graph, we can see on the x-axis, but you cannot see it, okay? On the x-axis are the proportion of females who are smokers, and on the y-axis is the proportion of males that are smokers. So if you take a look at the top left corner, you can probably see Indonesia. It has more than 70% of male smokers, but only about 5% of female smokers. So if you take a look at the far right of the graph, you can notice actually that Serbia, after Nauru, has the highest prevalence of female smokers in the world. If we single out our partner countries, it looks like this. So United Kingdom has the least prevalence, then Austria, then Serbia. But maybe more interestingly, if we take a look at the Circle U Alliance members, universities, countries, we can notice some clusters. First cluster, where United Kingdom, Norway, and Denmark are. The second, in which Italy, Germany, Austria, and Belgium are with a little bit higher prevalence of smoking, and then France and Serbia, who are completely in categories of their own. So what drives these differences? First, if we take a look at the United Kingdom, there is much research published in the United Kingdom regarding smoking, but these are not simple prevalence studies. These are also studies assessing the effectiveness of different intervention measures on smoking, and also they are performed in different various populations. So these are just some of the studies performed in the United Kingdom in the past 5 years regarding smoking. But in the United Kingdom, it does not end with research. We can see that a smoking ban has been implemented indoors in pubs and restaurants in the United Kingdom way back since 2007. And cigarettes are sold in plain packaging in order to reduce their appeal since 2017. The tax rates are presented on this figure, and we can see that they're constantly rising in the United Kingdom, and that the average pack of cigarettes costs almost 16 pounds. It was the price in February 2024. The United Kingdom has implemented many public health measures to encourage smoking cessation, ranging from Stoptober, which is a public health initiative aimed for smokers to stop smoking for the month of October. Then also there are widely available counseling services throughout the country, both one-on-one live sessions and group sessions if the participants wish to participate in group sessions, and also such websites as smokefree.gov, where a person can find some useful tools and tips depending on where in the quitting smoking process the person is. So we have seen the specter in the United Kingdom. What does this lead to? The trend of smoking in the United Kingdom from 1990 up to 2019 is dropping dramatically, as we can see. So these measures have taken some effect, and the United Kingdom has among the lowest smoking prevalence rates in Europe. Now, what about Austria? There is some research published in Austria regarding smoking, but it is of much lower intensity, and it's usually prevalent studies, not so much the prevention measure effectiveness evaluations. Austria has traditionally been called a smoker's paradise and the ashtray of Europe, and we can see why is this. Back in 2000, Austria, alongside Greece, has been the leader in prevalence of smoking in Europe and basically the world. There have been many talks and calls for action to change this situation, but they didn't have much results up until 2019. Then there was an online petition which almost 900 Austrians signed, which is about 14% of the legal age population. This petition was for banning smoking indoors in pubs and restaurants. And as of November 1st, 2019, this ban has been successfully implemented. But this was not met with overall excitement. There have been some protests surrounding it, and also some persons have closed bars and restaurants because of it, even prior to the measure being implemented. Why? They stated that most of their clientele are smokers, and they simply cannot expect them not to smoke. They don't believe this will happen, and the fines are really high. So it made more sense in the business sense for them to close the work and start doing something else than to remain because of the high fines. There are public health initiatives in Austria targeting smoking, and for example, there is a free phone line for counseling for those attempting to quit since 2006, and their telephone number is imprinted on every pack of cigarettes since 2016. They also have the smoke-free app giving tips for those trying to quit, and also they have informational material on this website, rauchfrei.com, which means smoke-free in English. And even though the reputation of Smoker's Paradise might not be the nicest ones, we can see that the trends of smoking in Austria are declining. And what I would like to point out that while this is global burden of disease data, it's the most relevant, but it's maybe not the most up-to-date, and this data is only up to 2019 when the ban was implemented, so we cannot actually see the effects of the ban itself. And finally, regarding Serbia, research has been conducted in Serbia and published, but again, this is mostly research on prevalence, not on prevention measures, and it is mostly performed in student population, not in general population. Unlike the United Kingdom and most recently Austria, there is still no smoking ban indoors in Serbia in place. And the way that legislation regarding smoking indoors works in Serbia is similar to what Austria had prior to 2019. So smaller establishments are left up to the owner to decide whether or not he wants to go smoke-free or smoke-full, and they are usually smoke-full. And larger establishments have to have at least 50% part for non-smokers, but the problem here is that this can be not implemented practically because you can have smokers, non-smokers downstairs and non-smokers up the stairs with nothing physically separating them. So this measure is still not so effective. And the situation regarding packaging of cigarettes in Serbia is similar to the one found in Austria, where packaging with health warnings is provided, while we have not yet achieved the Great Britain's plain packaging. However, there are public health efforts in Serbia to reduce the prevalence of smoking. We can see that every 31st of January is the National Smoke-Free Day, with this year's slogan being 365 days without tobacco, start from yourself, children are learning from you. Also, since 2022, there has been implemented a free phone line for those attempting to quit or those who have already quit and are struggling with it. But we can see that there are efforts and measures to reduce the prevalence of smoking in Serbia, but their impact and reach remains questionable, which this graph can corroborate. We can see that the age-standardized prevalence of smoking in Serbia is actually rising up to 2019. Here, it's important to note a very important cultural circumstance regarding smoking in Serbia, where smoking is normalized, and, for example, if you have guests over, and if you don't allow them to smoke in your home, you would be considered a bad host. So this is also a cultural thing. What would be the key takeaway of my talk? Just like with AAA at the beginning, to say that the prevalence of smoking is low in Europe or dropping is to be missing the entire picture. We can see that the measures that have been implemented relatively easily in the United Kingdom have been met with much struggle in Austria and still prove impossible to implement in Serbia. Therefore, different cultures might require different solutions for the same problems. We have to find a way to integrate the many health into the one health to make it work. Thank you. Now I will invite my colleague Andrija Pavlović to give his talk on social determinants of health. We will have. Could, are you asking the research that I have presented? I have also included the e-cigarettes. If there was like an intervention in United Kingdom where they're assessing the effectiveness of e-cigarettes in prevention of smoking. So those studies I have included, yes, but not e-cigarettes as for themselves.
Hello everyone. Have you ever wondered why some people seem to be more healthy than others? Is it only genetics? Today we'll explore a concept which bridges medicine and social justice, and those are social determinants of health. Before we start, I'd like to introduce myself. For those of you who haven't met me, I'm Dr. Andrea Pavlovic. I'm a teaching assistant here at the Faculty of Medicine, University of Belgrade, from which I also graduated as well. Beyond classroom, my field of interests are ethical dimensions in health and healthcare, which is why I'm pursuing my master's degree in bioethics alongside my doctoral studies. And today I'm really excited to explore this topic with you. So I'd first like to mention health as the main topic of our workshop. When we talk about health, how do people perceive health? How do common people perceive it and see it? If we stop and ask a random person on the street what health is, the most likely you will get an answer that health is absence of disease or infirmity. But according to the World Health Organization, health is a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being. For most of us, achieving that state of health is a personal matter. It's a mixture of functions of our genes, our lifestyle choices, and some would say a little bit of luck. But we tend to focus on what we put inside our body, what we eat, what we drink, how much we exercise, or how we manage stress. But there is a whole world behind that that actually influences health outcomes from the very beginning of our lives. And this world is often overseen. That is why today we're gonna delve into a topic that goes beyond genes and tries to explain what truly shapes our health. We're gonna explore social and economic determinants of health and how they play a crucial role in global health equity. So, what are social determinants of health? Social determinants of health are the conditions in the environments where people are born, where people live, work, age, and these conditions actually affect a wide range of health, functioning, and quality of life outcomes and risks. They can be grouped into 5 domains: economic stability, education access and quality, healthcare access and quality, neighborhood and built environment, and social and community context. So let's start unpacking them one by one. But I'll just like to mention that since we have a limited time, this is a really thorough topic, so we'll just be able to scratch the surface of it. And my goal here is to gain your interest in it for you to explore it by yourself as well. When we talk about economic stability, it's a harsh reality that lower income is linked with shorter lifespan. Some studies in the United States have shown a significant gap in life expectancy between low-income and high-income earners. And what if I told you that adults in the richest 1% of the US population could expect to live 14.6 years longer than those in the poorest 1%? That's a huge number. But let's not talk only about the extremes, so we can analyze this graph together. Even if we exclude the extremes, and even if we, you can see the top 1% of the poorest people, there is a huge gap and a jump between of them. Even if we take into consideration top 10% of poorest people and top 10% of the highest and richest male adults in the US, this difference in expected life is around 10 years. It is somewhat lower in women, where this difference actually is around 5 years. This is still a lot. Another studies show that children which are born and raised in low-income families have 4 times higher chance to have a fair or poor health. And this is because the economic aspect of social determinants of health can actually create a ripple effect. People with lower incomes have more trouble affording nutritious food or quality housing, as well as access to preventative health care. And this factor combine and create a cycle of poor health and limited opportunities for these people. So you can imagine a family which struggle to put food on their table. Today, fresh vegetables and fresh fruits, as well as meat, are becoming a luxury. So they're often exchanged for cheaper versions, for processed food, which are high in calories, high in unhealthy fats, in added sugars, and therefore this type of lifestyle can lead to certain diseases like obesity, or chronic diseases like heart disease or diabetes as well. But financial stress and financial instability can also cause some mental health issues as well. Constant worrying about financial stability can actually weaken the immune system, and that makes people more susceptible to illness, which further can lead to developing chronic diseases like depression. Next up is education. Education is another key architecture of health. And people with higher education tend to have better health outcomes. But this isn't only because they have better job opportunities, higher salaries, and better access to health care. It is because education empowers individuals to make informed health decisions. Individuals with higher education levels can navigate complex medical information. For example, a person which has a strong foundation in science is more likely to understand why is it important to get vaccinated in order to prevent infectious diseases, or get screened for cancer in order to get an early and better treatment option. This is another interesting graph which shows difference in life expectancy by level of education. We can see that difference is much bigger in men than women, except in one country, except in Israel. And this gap, or this difference, can go as high as 14.8 years in Slovak Republic, while the average life expectancy difference between higher educated people and lower educated people are 6.6 years for men and 4.1 for women. Another study published in 2020 analyzed countries' level of education and health outcomes. It used the data of 26 countries, and this data was followed for 21 years. This is not the highest quality graph, so I'll try to explain it for you. This figure shows, on the x-axis, you can see years from 1995 all the way to 2015, and on the y-axis, you have an average infant mortality rate per 1,000 of live births. And this figure shows that, in general, all education indicators, like average education, including upper secondary education and above, actually rise rise over time, as well as average enrollment in education. But the only indicator that is actually decreases over time is average education, which is below secondary, as well as infant mortality, which is of course a favorable outcome for us. This should suggest that there is a negative association of education with mortality rates. Now let's discuss access of high quality healthcare. This is another crucial social determinant. Having access to preventive healthcare services lowers the possibility of health issues actually escalating into more serious issues. But of course, sometimes some geographical barriers or language limitations or cultural insensitivity within healthcare system can create barriers and obstacles to accessing this care. Imagine a person which is experiencing a chest pain. In one scenario, that person lives next to the hospital, which has high quality staff, which is available, and it is well staffed. In another scenario, nearest hospital is miles away, and it is understaffed and it lacks essential resources. This only shows how access to healthcare actually impacts our health outcomes. According to a 2022 study, it was found that 26 million of people in the United States lack health insurance. This lack of coverage can lead to delayed preventive health care, increased hospital admissions, and poorer health outcomes in general. This was only supported by a next study which found that people living in low-income neighborhoods have a high rate of preventable hospital admissions, which means that if they had access to preventive care, they actually wouldn't have needed to be admitted to hospital. And access isn't the only concern. Quality of care is equally important, and it has been shown that Black population and people with lower socioeconomic background actually receive lower quality healthcare and care compared to white population. This can include misdiagnosis or poor pain management and limited access to specialists. And the study in the States, which examined the most populated cities in the United States, showed that at national level, absolute difference between life expectancy of Black population and white population, it was just a bit over 4 years. There was a difference in favor of white population. Only one city actually showed different results. Next one is neighborhood and built environment. As you can see, we don't think much about it, but our zip code actually matters more than we think. We talked about access to health food. Fresh fruits, vegetables, whole grains are essential for good health, but sometimes some communities don't have access to it, and they're overcrowded with fast food chains and restaurants. This leads to changes in lifestyle, which further can lead to some health problems. Next again is safe housing. Safe and secure housing is crucial for both physical and mental well-being. Exposure to poor housing conditions, poor ventilation, or exposure to toxins can lead to some respiratory problems and other health issues. And access to reliable public transportation is also crucial for people to reach their jobs or healthcare facilities, and even for getting that healthy food. So a study in pediatrics found that children living in disadvantaged neighborhoods actually experienced higher rates of asthma compared to those in wealthier areas. And exposure to these pollutants and allergens such as traffic fumes and industrial waste can actually exacerbate these respiratory issues. And last but not least, social, and community context. Humans are social beings, and strong social connections impact our health. Strong social support from our friends, neighbors, and families provide emotional support, provide a sense of belonging, and can even motivate us to adopt healthy behaviors. On the other side, social isolation can actually be a risk factor for some diseases, but we'll see that. Here we have, I'll mention two meta-analyses done both at the Brigham Young University in Utah, which examined loneliness and social isolation as risk factors for mortality. First one included more than 300,000 people, adults, and their results showed that the risk of premature death was 50% lower for adults who had greater connection with others. And the other one included even more adults. It included 3.4 million adults, and their results also showed that individuals that lack social interaction and connections are at risk at premature mortality. But what is interesting about this is that this risk is actually comparable to some well-established risk factors like obesity or lack of physical activity, substance abuse, mental health, and so on. So I mentioned all of this, and I want to say that this knowledge isn't just about understanding the disparities. It's about actually unlocking a path toward a more just and healthy society. This workshop just serves as a seed for change and by sparking an awareness to you about these problems. And by acknowledging and addressing the social and economic determinants of health, we strive towards a world where health isn't a privilege of the few, but actually a right for all. Thank you.
I now give the floor to Ivan Nikolic, who will talk about discrimination and equality in global health and international law perspective. Just 1 second, sorry, I'm having some technical issues.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for coming to our workshop. I am a PhD candidate from the Faculty of Law. My topic of PhD is not in medical law. It is in immigration law, specifically family reunification, but I do research in gender discrimination and discrimination in general, so I hope this will be interesting for you. Firstly, because I know not everyone is from the law faculty, I want to speak about some concepts that are maybe common sense, but maybe you don't know the actual terminology for it. And I want to specifically speak about indirect discrimination and substantive discrimination because they represent the sort of invisible foe of the health system. Direct discrimination is something that we already know, and it's the typical form if you're treated differently than other people. However, you have specific forms of discrimination, such as indirect discrimination, when there are specific norms or provisions that are neutral but have a discriminatory effect on a certain group of people or an individual, or the substantive, the formal and substantive, the difference would be between a law banning, women from becoming lawyers, and just a law faculty saying, oh, you can't apply. So basically having a whole framework prohibiting people or having a specific pattern, social behavior that influences people. And I would like to say about health, we already know that it's a human right. We spoke about it, but I think it's very important to say that it's very interconnected with other human rights. And as we seen in the last presentation, social determinants are very important for being healthy and for having the right to health. And also because I don't know how many people are from international law. If you're an individual, you can't sue another individual by using international law. Only the states. You can only sue states or international organizations. They're the ones that are responsible for fulfilling obligations. So that's like a common misgiving. So here is basically a list of where you can find prohibition of discrimination and also the right to health. This is just the most important acts. As you see, it's very big. However, the effects are not what you would expect. You would expect with such a huge framework that there would be no discrimination, but that's not the case. So because we don't have a lot of time, I actually picked one norm that I want to talk about. And yeah, it's not seenable here, but it's from the International Covenant of Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. And this is where the right to health is given to all. So the actual statement is that states have to, they're obliged to give everyone the enjoyment of the highest attainable standard of physical and mental health. And this is not only linked to healthcare, but also to determinants such as food, water, working conditions, a healthy environment, etc. So you can basically take this right and also use it if you live in a very poor neighborhood and have bad sanitation, stuff like that. You can say, oh, my right to health is being violated. And we can use the 3AQ model. It's basically a test to see if we have if the violation is present. If we have, so availability is, for instance, do we have enough hospitals? Do we have enough medicine? Do we have enough staff, which is very important to look after all these unhealthy people with diseases? Accessibility is very important, and I am pretty sure that all of you know at least some example of how this influences health. For instance, no ramps, expensive medicine, no information anywhere on specific diseases or maybe where you need to go. For instance, I need to go to the second floor and you cannot find information anywhere. And also education levels are very important because, as we've said before, someone who has low education will probably not have enough information to access specialized medical systems, or just asking for the right medicine can also be a problem in that case. And when I talk about this act, there are actually three norms that are very important. One is the prohibition of discrimination, which goes through all the act and through all the rights. The other one is why actually the right of health is not that implemented through this act. And that is basically the method of progressive realization of social rights. So the states are not obliged to immediately give you everything. They're obliged to give you access to the maximum of its available resources. So basically, how much money you have, that's how much rights you will have in a way. However, you can already see the problem here because the states can just say, oh, we don't have enough money to buy equipment, to hire people, or to build hospitals. But the actual act and the committee has agreed that you always have enough money to implement some minimal changes and to minimal changes to programs. So to implement minimal changes, especially if it's like towards non-discrimination. So non-discrimination is like a no-go. You always have to follow it and to be very mindful. Therefore, like as it said here, severe resource constraints are no justifications. You can always like at least make ramps to at hospital entrances. And here is the actual norm for prohibition of discrimination. And also something very important is the actual restriction or limitations of rights. So some people say that you have rights and they can never be restricted, but as we see in the COVID times, that is not the case, and in any pandemic time, that's very questionable what can be restricted. And here, this act gives you some conditions that must be followed for if you want to restrict rights. So, and basically, even other acts give this sort of like paneling of conditions, and the most important ones are usually that it needs to have a legitimate aim, that it needs to be strictly necessary, and that it's proportional. Those are the ones that are usually the most important ones, and that determine if there is a violation of rights, if the measure is discriminatory or not. And I've also put here AIDS, because the AIDS epidemic had a lot of quarantines and isolations which target specifically LGBTQ people. And also, I mean, we can also question, like, is banning smoking discriminatory towards people who smoke or not? You know, these tests can be used for a lot of things. However, this act is all great, and this is all, I guess, on paper, seems fascinating and wonderful, but it's very underutilized. And mostly, I found the reason to be is that states have too much freedom to decide what they want to implement and how they want to implement. And also, there is no punishment for the states. They just get a report from the committee saying, oh, you did bad, please do these recommendations to fix your systems. So it's more like a shame mechanism than anything else. So we as individuals are left to use the European Court of Human Rights, and I think it has an actual pretty efficient system. And usually we use the Article 14, which is the prohibition of discrimination. However, the Article 14 cannot be used alone, so you need to use it in violation of some right, and it's usually Article 8, which is the right to private and family life. So there is no right to health in the European Convention of Human Rights. It's also very problematic how civil and political rights are somewhat more important and more privileged than social and economic rights. This is a consequence, actually, of the Cold War. So this is our legacy in a way. So I picked obstetric violence because we had some cases that made the whole media scandal in a way. And I feel like it's important to actually have more knowledge about this topic. It's not really talked about. This is a worldwide systemic problem. So we are not the only ones having issues regarding pregnancy and childcare in facilities. And it has many forms. It can be like unnecessary medical procedures, verbal abuse, or I don't know, I put here violation of privacy because there was a nurse in Serbia who live streamed childbirths on TikTok, and she was just suspended. So that's the end of that, basically. Also, we see that there's like intersectional discrimination here. It's very large because a lot of factors can influence the height of violence you would experience, or like the treatment you would experience. And I put two examples. So prisoners that are restrained on bed and gagged during pregnancies, and also forced sterilization of Roma women, because there was a huge European Court of Rights case law regarding that. And as we see, this is not only connected to the right to health, it's connected to the right to life, the prohibition of torture, right to privacy, access to information. All of this could be violated if something like this happens. A core element of all of these actions is informed consent and autonomy. And it's very important, and I think not a lot is talked about maybe. I'm not sure how the Faculty of Medicine talks about these issues, but in law, this is like, basically you can never violate this. It's a very, very strictly speaking, every procedure, if a woman needs to go to all procedures during pregnancies, you would need to ask her for permission for every procedure and to explain the positive and negatives of that procedure, and also to see if she understands that, to be like, do you concede to that? Which sounds very impossible when you're like basically giving birth to a child, or like staffers who are already overworked need to have additional paperwork and questions regarding this. And there was a case with the CEDAW committee where a Roma woman was sterilized, and she was given a paper during her birth, so she was giving birth, and she was given a paper where the doctor just by hand added the Latin name of forced sterilization, and that was considered to be okay in Hungary, and she got sterilized. She was not given any choice with this. She was just like, you signed this. They did the procedure. They never told her anything, and she found out later. So the question is, you also like, I don't know, do you consider this ethically okay? Probably not. However, like this is an extreme case of this, but I feel like the system should implement some ways to battle this. So maybe like explaining everything before the actual childbirth would be nice. So these are some articles that can be used in international law. And I've also put some cases because this doesn't really have a huge case law still, but I think it will be in time. And because some of these actions, especially unnecessary medical procedures, can be considered cruel or degrading treatment, can be considered torture in some moments, you can actually use some of the other acts which have immediate obligation, and it's easier to prove, easier to get a response from the state if you prove that it is torture, because there is no limitations. The state has no right to restrict the prohibition of torture. I've also put here the case of Milica Filipovic that was actually supposed to be prosecuted, and it was given to the prosecution for a criminal trial. However, it was dismissed. And then, because there was a whole media, of course, you need to always go to the media to try to force the state to act, they put it under review again. This was a case where she has lost her baby, so it was dead in her womb, and they tried to induce labor. It lasted 3 days, and at the end she actually gave birth in the toilet. She went to the nurse asking, "Can you help me? I think it's coming." And the nurse just told her, "Go to the toilet and finish it." Yeah, so that was it was really shocking, and also the reaction of the state authorities are really shocking. And as we see here on the slide, the lack of accountability is a huge problem here because it's treated as a rare case and not something that has a pattern or that happens systemic. And also because I don't want to be all blaming public healthcare workers for this, a huge problem is the degradation of public healthcare system. So basically overworked medical staffs, bad working conditions, no medication, very abusive working environment as well, because also a lot of the health workers are women as well. So it's also this reaction towards women, and the hierarchy of power in a way also is seen here. So, and this is also something that's happening all over the world. So I put like 2 examples, I guess, from Finland, where the president of a midwifery union says basically this is a rare case emergency and we shouldn't like create unnecessary fear. And also our Ministry of Health, which says if we start now a witch hunt, no one will want to be a gynecologist, which I find very funny because maybe it is a rare problem, but it's happening. So you need to do something. You can't just be like, oh, we will build a new hospital and everything will be okay. No, it won't. Everything is falling apart. You need to do something, basically. And this is also, as I said, everything that's happening here is a violation of human rights, and it will probably in some period go to either the European Court of Human Rights or some of the committees. So, yeah, this and I want to hear your opinion as well after this, so I hope maybe someone will comment. I wanted to actually show also the global health side of everything, so how it looks on the global stage, because discrimination can also be seen as unequal access to resources. And we have lots of divides. We already know the global north and global south divide, the regional power imbalances, the urban and rural divide. And we also, because you know that only states and international organizations can be actors, now we have new actors on scene, which is the pharmaceutical industry and we don't really have any international law that binds them. So this is a very dangerous situation because they can't be really sued at the international level. Only states can be sued. So you would need to sue the state for it to control the pharmaceutical company, agency, or whatever. And they're also the new actors in a way because they hold the IP of most of our medicine. So you always have to negotiate with them over price. And I've put 3 examples here that you can actually see the inequality. We all know the pandemic and what happened there, especially with the vaccines, and who gets vaccines, which country gets which vaccines, how they're divided, the border closures, which happen without warning, very violent. You always have like information, or you cannot pass now. Also the use of IP law, which I've already stated, where companies abuse their position and put enormous prices on life-giving medicine, or basically something that's needed, something that's necessary. And also climate change, which we're all basically feeling. And as stated here, 14% of, so the global north, which is 14% of the world, are causing 95% of historical carbon dioxide emission. So we already see a big imbalance who's responsible and who needs to maybe fix some of its pollution. And I've also put the war happening in Gaza because it's a very specific use of military power against medical staff, hospitals, the medical system. And the special rapporteur of the right of health has said that the practice of medicine itself is being used as a political tool. And I would like to, yeah. Yes, also shelter and also attacks on medical staff, bombings, shootings, denying of treatment, of medical supplies, of food, water. Yeah, so everything can be basically, this is a very specific situation because hospitals haven't been used in this way in a long time as actual tools of war in a way. So yeah, and also this is, I put this as the last slide, but I think it's good to say it now. This is the last message of one of the doctors before they were killed by a strike. And I think it's like, kind of says it all in a way. We did what we could, remember us, and that's all you can do as a health professional in a way. You do what you can in your capacity. And also some of the solutions I put here could be a decolonizing of the system. There's also a pandemic treaty trying to happen because it's always stalling. It's always like, oh, they can't agree on the norms, but this could like regulate maybe access to medicine. We have some guidelines now that are very helpful, but I don't know what use they would be. International cooperation is always a go, and the need of a human right-based approach in the global health and in health in general. These are not 2 systems. They should be 1 system. And basically that's it. Thank you for listening to me. I hope it was at least somewhat interesting, and I hope you have some interesting questions, experiences, or just try attack me maybe. It's also allowed.
Thank you, Andrea and Ivana, for these 2 great talks and completely different perspectives. I will now open the floor for the first part of the discussion. Are there any questions from the audience? Also from the online audience? We are monitoring the comments. I have a question for Ivana. It is national law, not international, so it may be not maybe your area of expertise, but in the case of the nurse that was TikToking, if I could say, the childbirth, is suspension really the minimal sentence? What has failed here? Is it the law itself? Is it the implementation of the law? Because obviously something has failed.
It's pretty horrifying to have someone just TikTok you giving birth. Well, firstly, this was not a criminal case or a civil case. It went to the ombudsman, So this is a body that it's independent and that does reviews and has some sort of action he can take, but it never went to the courts, and that's the main problem. So the person cannot really be punished if there's no judgment, a court judgment or anything. So everything that basically it was left on the hospital to decide what to do, and they decided suspension was the best method.
So it isn't a criminal.
Yeah, but well, there is
Act.
elements, and I feel like that the person can actually sue. However, with our inefficient system, I'm not sure how good that would be in general. But yeah, sometimes I'm like, why do people have crazy ideas? Like, why is this okay? It feels like there is no limit to violation or mistreatment or misdemeanor. Yeah, and basically, even the form of privacy is very, in a way, not really respected, because I've had a situation where someone said a diagnosis, or, you know, like, he told my friend that he needs not to take that medicine in the hallway of the hospital. He doesn't need to take hormones in the hallway of the hospital, where everyone is, you know, where everyone goes, where everyone can hear his problem or maybe his disease. I think sometimes you need to, you know, have a bit more, you know, be more sensitive to some people, particularly if it's like maybe cancer or HIV, something that's already like influencing their whole life. So yeah, it's basically the solution is it was not a criminal case, but there is elements that this could be jail time, basically. Well, not jail time, but at least compensation. So yeah.
It's definitely an issue of empathy, if I could interpret it that way. And I think it is important. There are a lot of medical workers here. This is something that needs to be in the back of our minds constantly. Are there any? Yes, please.
I have this question. I'm not sure if you have the answer for it. But when it comes
I will try.
of bombing of revolution
Mm-hmm.
during the 1990s, will there ever be anyone who will be answering for those crimes? I mean, are those war crimes, or what would you consider them? Okay. When it comes to the bombing of Dragiša Mišović Hospital, like during the 90s, what
I understand your
Okay.
question. So I want to first say that that part of law is not my specialty. I purposely didn't study it because I wanted to do something. I think there's enough material for anything. I think it is. It is a war crime, and it should be prosecuted. However, I feel like it will never happen because of the political situation. And also, like now, I mean, things happening in Ukraine, in Gaza. Will they ever be prosecuted? I'm not sure. Will something ever happen to change that? Like, yeah, now you have the UN putting a resolution and saying stop this war, basically, and nothing is still happening. Israel is still attacking. There's still not only the attacks and the strikes, but you have basically they're denied the food, water. Help comes and they bomb them basically. So I would like for this to be, of course, a part of, for it to be like a crime and for people to get compensation, but I'm not sure it will happen, unfortunately.
But even if it gets like brought up again as a war crime, who will be answering for it? Like, will it be like the government, officials?
So basically, it will be always the government because they're supposed to look after their officials. They're the ones controlling the officials. Or it could be how, some way that they could do it is basically like the government never gave that order and you need to go after him as an individual. And if you do that, you need to do it through the national system. So international law can only be used against states or international organizations for now. There's also an indication that transnational companies would become actors, so they would become liable, and I hope they do for environmental, environmental hazard and stuff like that. So I'm sorry, I don't have an answer for you.
No, thank you for your answer. Like, it's really interesting. I mean, the case is interesting itself.
There's so many cases. We're just one of the cases. Like,
I know, but like, it's our case, so it's like kind of painful.
you actually have like this. We did try to sue some of the NATO states, but it was dismissed. So you can actually look at that. It was actually pretty good done, the actual claim, but it was dismissed. So I don't know what's going to happen, basically.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Thank you for your answer.
Thank you for your question.
I have a question for, I guess, Dr. Alex as a host. We mentioned conflicts a few times, and my question are the conflicts, hopefully not global conflicts, but are they a breaking point of a concept of global health? Can we have global health with big conflicts?
It's a good question, and I feel in settings of conflicts, global health is more important than ever. So in that case, we have even larger inequalities, inequities that need to be solved. I don't know if anyone else has another comment, but it's a two-way street because maybe not the same persons who are involved in conflicts are the ones working on the global health issues. So you can have people working hard, even harder because of the conflicts, but who makes the policies basically is still in charge. That is the reality.
Yeah, I think I will add something. We do have some, I guess, legal framework which should guarantee the minimum human rights. So access to clean water, food, and everything. But in conflicts, those rights are not respected. And that's why we have genocide, war crimes, things happening. And this is not just between those two parties, but it spreads out. So it's very hard, and I'm not sure, mostly because the political situation is never good. It's never like, oh, now it's the time to fix problem. It's always like trying to patch up holes, basically, and hoping the boat doesn't sink. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any more questions online? None? Okay, one more a question from the audience.
You said earlier that this woman who is giving TikToks about birds, is she suspended for some time or forever? Like, can she work ever in her life again as obstetrics, I guess? What is she, or?
Oh, well, it just says nurse and the actual claim. And I think she was suspended for a few months. But I will check that and give you the information again, just to be precise. But this is not really that strange, because I read the Finnish cases. I have a Finnish report here, where they say that it's very common for them just to be suspended, and that's it. Or that's the harshest punishment. Other punishment is them just apologizing to the victim, and that's it, basically. And the hospital is saying everything was done with the procedure in mind, etc., etc.
Does ever a victim does they, I assume there is many of them, does ever someone do about that anything?
Well, yeah, for instance, in that Finnish case, there was one case where the woman actually sued the practitioner, and after 4 years, she got the conviction and she was compensated, and that was the end of that, basically. And also, as we already know, healthcare is very child-focused here, so sometimes the child becomes the priority more than the actual women's health. So here it was like the death of the child, in this case, and not so much the women's health that was looked on. So I don't know, I think there needs to be a more defined system for this. And not only accountability, but actually trying to change something, anything. Like, it's not enough to build a hospital and to be like, we're done, you know.
Absolutely agree. Thank you.
Any more questions from the audience? Okay, we can move on to the next lecture, which will be presented by our guest, David Elf, about the health security nexus. Enjoy.
Hello everybody, my name is Dewi and I'm a PhD student from King's College London. My research covers global access to vaccines, especially during pandemics, and I'm looking at the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. But more specifically, I'm looking at vaccine nationalism. I don't know if you've heard, but it's essentially the situation whereby we have countries, mainly high-income countries, who stock up and who hoard vaccines before they become available on the market, which leads the rest of the world, whereby they have less access, basically, to the same vaccines. Actually, this is how I came across this global health security. I came to look deeper into the idea of global and whether it truly is global or not. So now I will present the structure of the presentation. We will first begin by looking at how security has been perceived traditionally, before then looking at how health security where it's located on the security agenda and how it came up to the security agenda, before looking at how it's adopted in practice through the securitization process. Finally, we will look at whether or not global health security is a solution or a challenge to global health. And just a side note, health security and global health security, they're interchangeable also within the literature. So sometimes I speak about health security, but I do mean global health security. So what is security? Essentially, it's the idea of being free from danger or threat. It's actually a concept that had already existed well before the 16th century. It was a focal point for European political thought from the 17th century and has been understood as a condition for both individuals and states. So individuals and states should be secure. But this concept has been extended and reconceptualized since, with the most recent moment of reconceptualization being during and right after the Cold War, because we have new threats. It's not only military threats, we have ideological threats, for example. And then in the 21st century, we can consider that the security has been expanded to include environmental security, economic security, human security, and of course health security, as I will address. So let's look at a traditional perspective of security, which is national security. It's one of the oldest forms of security. So it basically comes out of the idea that the state is a referent object and that the state has to protect this referent object. So the referent object is an object to be protected. So national security relates to all that affects its preservation and survival. This includes its territory, its boundaries, its people, population, its identity, maybe political and military power. And traditionally, this was focused on protection against threats of military nature, because the most extensive form of threat in this time, or for a long time, has been military attacks. However, we see also that national security is growing, and we have the inclusion of health threats onto the national security agenda, as we see with COVID-19 pandemic, for example. So it's important to know that national security is also about power play between states. This is especially true within the health emergency context. So a country with political or economic power can use this to their advantage and such has been done with the United Kingdom, who, thanks to their political and economic power, they were able to conclude many advance purchase agreements, which allows them to reserve doses of vaccines before they even come onto the market. Then we'll talk about the collective security perspective, which is another traditional security perspective. So essentially, it's the idea that a threat to one member of the international community is a threat to all. So we can think about the adage from the Three Musketeers, all for one for all. And it came out of the failure to neither prevent recurrent war nor promote peaceful cooperation, as they understood that the national security perspective hasn't been successful in this. So they thought, okay, collective security could be an alternative. So the first incarnation of the collective security perspective was with the League of Nations, but as we know, they weren't very successful since we had World War II. But collective security was reattempted with the United Nations. So they have their own collective security system, and it's still working today. The United Nations Charter is actually is an instrument of collective security. And while the United Nations was born out of wars, which we could understand as being a collective security system for military threats, the Charter actually does not limit threats to that of health nature, or it does not limit, there's no exclusion of non-military threats, and they're not limited to threats of military nature, which means that we could also consider health threats in this case. So now let's look at global health security and how it actually came into the security agenda. So we have a series of events that led to global health security entering the mainstream security stage. So first we have the bioterrorist attacks. This warned political leaders to recognize public health protection on the same level as the police, for example, or the fire brigade, so as something that they should take care of, and this on a global level. Then we have the United Nations Security Council that considered the HIV/AIDS pandemic as a national security issue. So they brought what was this pandemic up to the international level by declaring it. And then we have also analysts and governments who begin to frame public health problems as national, non-traditional security threats. So with all these in mind, there has been an aim of bringing global health security to the global level, so really becoming global. And finally, we also have the linkage of health security to the international health regulations in 2005, which are the only existing international legally binding set of regulations that governs this area. As my colleague Ivana mentioned, there is also the pandemic treaty that's being negotiated. That's also where my research I'm looking at as well. And so yeah, this is how we got global health security, which aims to be global. But is global health security truly global? This is my question, and this has been my question as I research this area. So in addition to what I've mentioned before with the United Nations Security Council, with the international health regulations, we also have other moves that aim to bring health security onto the international level. For example, we have the Global Fund, or we have also the Campaign for Access to Essential Medicines. So this internationalization is supposed to open up the doors of global health to other actors. Also, as Ivana has mentioned, we have not only states in this area, but also opened it up to the private sector, the civil society. And so this is meant to allow for a more globalized participation in the area of infectious diseases. So let's look at how global health security is, what happens when it is adopted. And for this, I'm going to look at the securitization process because it's the most widely exercised process following a global health security perspective. So the basic idea of securitization is that it is a discursive construction of a threat. So it's because we say something is a threat that it becomes a threat. But of course, the we, it's not just you and I, it's a securitizing actor, which is usually a head of state, a political figure with the authority to say that this is a threat. So let's see how it has been exercised in practice with the examples of the UK, Serbia, and Austria. So we have the virus, and it has been noticed, and so we have the heads of state of the UK, of Austria, Serbia. They all understand that this is a threat, or at least call it a threat. They pronounce a securitization process, and this leads to the emergency measures that are being put in place. And the sign of a successful securitization process is when the audience accepts that this is a threat, which has been done, as we have seen. But what is the problem? Why is this a problem? So the issue with securitization, especially within high-income countries, is that this allowed for vaccine nationalism, which is the process whereby countries they basically hoard a lot of the vaccines available. And this vaccine nationalism is a problem when it becomes a defining part of their national strategy. And this is possible when they securitize as they adopt a global health security perspective. So, for example, here I took some clippings from newspaper articles to show the extent to which vaccine nationalism was practiced. For example, in the US, we have $1 million lottery or free beer to incentivize people to vaccinate because they have so many vaccines. Or just not sharing shots. Here in Serbia, we have an offer of 25 euros. I don't know if you all saw that. And then we also have waste, a lot of waste. Instead of going around, it goes in the bin. And then we have also here, this is a report on how rich countries and pharmaceutical corporations are breaking their vaccine promises. So, my question is global health security a solution or a challenge to global health? Because when we understand that vaccine nationalism is, for example, is derived from a national health security perspective, it becomes clear that defining a health emergency as a national security perspective is not the way to go. But it seems, or it appears to be the natural perspective following a global health security perspective. So is it truly global? Does it deliver global health equity? So even despite global health security ambition of being an international notion, one that is global and thinks about the global stage, when we see what happens in practice, it seems far from that. So I believe that the adoption of global health security challenges global health and is not necessarily a solution in the form it is right now. Because, as an example, when high-income countries adopt a global health security strategy, they follow a national security perspective. And then this leads most of the world, 84% of the world population, worse off. So linked to our workshop today on the importance of understanding the possibility of different perspectives, I'd like to show you that one perspective, a global perspective, can actually be seen as different from what it's meant to be. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Devi, for this insightful talk and for joining us today. We have welcomed you to Belgrade and are pleased to have you here. And now our next special guest is Sofia Bauer from the University of Vienna.
So, hello and good afternoon from my side as well. My talk will some kind of be linked to what David Elf just told us about. I'm studying history, or I'm doing my PhD in history and focusing on medical history. And my PhD thesis is about anatomical teaching practices used in Vienna between 1848 and 1914, and materials used in this broad sense. Yeah. And today I'm going to tell you what exactly public debates in Austrian, British, and Serbian newspaper articles on vaccines against swine flu and the WHO's influenza preparedness plans have in common. And so I'm going to dive into it right now. So maybe some of you remember the 2009-2010 swine flu pandemic. It was declared a pandemic in 2009, and the threat was over in August 2010. And it was a mix of swine, bird, and human virus strains. And at first it was called Mexican flu because the first cases appeared to be in Mexico, but then the virus spread from there to North America and then Europe. And the estimation of number of excess deaths is between 148,000 to 284,000 in total. During the pandemic, there were some vaccines used or available in Europe. The famous examples are Pandemrix by GlaxoSmithKline, then the Zelvapan by Baxter International, and Fochetria by Novartis. These are all pharmaceutical companies, which we maybe know from COVID. And Pandemrix and Fochetria were approved by the European Medical Association, on 23rd of September in 2009, and the Zelvapan vaccine was approved the following week. The media coverage in Austria, I will do it alphabetically, like Austria, Great Britain and Serbia, but also chronologically. And we right now will delve into what was written by newspapers during the pandemic. So the first newspaper articles appeared in April 2009 in Der Standard, and they said that a contract with Baxter was prepared by the Austrian government in case of a pandemic. And there was also an information about the 6-level pandemic plan introduced by WHO. And the Ministry of Health, the Austrian Ministry of Health, published a regulation that cases should be reported. And at the same time, WHO raised the pandemic level to level 4, and the first case of swine flu was monitored in Austria. Then, in May 2009, the company Baxter published a statement that they have received a virus probe so that they can produce a vaccine. At the same time, the hysteria around swine flu influenza was also labeled as lucrative, and the newspaper article said that Baxter had also a local production in Austria and that Austria started the production of vaccines. And there was also a critique on WHO's information policies, which we will get to in a few slides. In June 2009, WHO declared that the swine flu is a pandemic, and Novartis, the Swiss company, announced the development of a vaccine. And Baxter, at the same time, started the production of the vaccine, and the serial production of vaccines in general started. In July, in Austria, the Standard reported an increase in infection numbers. And then in August, there was a decrease in infection numbers. We maybe remember it from COVID that in summer months, the infection rates dropped. Then in August, Baxter said that the vaccine is ready, but it needed to be approved by the EMA. And in September 2009, next to the approval of the first 2 vaccines, Austria rolled out the public vaccine program in the newspaper, so everybody could inform themselves about who is the priority group and so on. And in October 2009, finally Baxter got approved, and Baxter had an exclusive contract with Austria, and it was deemed to be unfair comparing to other countries. At the same time, WHO said, okay, 1 jab is enough to tackle swine flu, and from October 27, 2009, the vaccine was available to public, although there were some priority groups installed. Doctors and nurses came first, and the risk group second, and the rest is third. In November 2009, there was again an increase in infection numbers in overall Europe, and vaccination of risk groups and health people started in Austria, and there was also a recommendation for children to get vaccinated. And Serbia declared in November 2009 that the swine flu is an epidemic, and the highest rate of infections was actually expected for January. In December 2009, the swine flu crossed the zenith, the case numbers, and in January it seemed that the case number dropped so far that vaccines were also left over, and there was a decrease in infection numbers, which resulted in the declaration in March 2010 by the Austrian government that the pandemic is over. And what I found interesting is that in August 2010 already there were some newspaper articles covering the case of narcolepsy occurring together with the pandemics at CHOP, and this was confirmed then in 2011, 2012 and 2015 by different studies, and in 2018 GlaxoSmithKline was declared to have botched the swine flu vaccines. So we come to Great Britain. It started in April 2009, first reportings that about the first swine flu case in Europe. Then in June 2009, as we've heard for Austria, the WHO declared the swine flu pandemic. These are all again newspaper articles which inform the public. Then in September 2009, BBC wrote that GlaxoSmithKline and Baxter had a contract with Great Britain, and they also declared the order of risk groups to get vaccines first. So they started with individuals aged 6 months up to 65 years, and also pregnant women, and household context of immunocompromised individuals, etc., etc. So these were the first who should get the jab. And at the same time, in September 2009, the vaccine campaign was rolled out in general. And in November 2009, there were reports of an increasing death rate. And in December, there were reports in a drop in swine flu cases. And then in January, there was again a drop in case numbers, similar to the one I could observe in media coverage in Austria. And in March 2010, there were figures of swine flu uptake published by the media, and in April 2010, there was an article about 34 million vaccine doses that were left over and not used by the public. In August 2010, the WHO then declared that the swine flu pandemic is over, and in September 2013, there were also reports about the pandemic's swine flu jab, and that the compensation would be open to the public. So now we come to Serbia. Again, it started in April 2009 that the swine flu arrived in Europe, and that there were protective measurements installed. In June 2009, reports were published that a Swiss production of a vaccine by the company Novartis started, and that Serbia bought vaccines from WHO, from the company Novartis. And at the same time, of course, the declaration of the pandemic was also published. And interestingly, I came across an article that was about the competition between pharma companies producing the vaccines. So who gets the first vaccine ready? And in July 2009, there was also a questioning of economic profit of pharma companies from the pandemic. And in September 2009, it was also told to the public that one jab is enough, and that the Novartis vaccine bought by the Serbian government protects. In November 2009, the swine flu, or Serbia, as I already told you, declared the swine flu as epidemic, and the first vaccines were available for priority groups and later for all. So this was the general plan, and it was enrolled by the government in the first half of December in 2009. And in January 2010, Serbia stopped the purchase of vaccines from Novartis because there was a lack in public response to government's vaccination campaign. And in June 2010, there were reports that European Council would investigate 3 WHO experts because they bought a huge amount of vaccines, and the influenza was supposed a major threat, which eventually caused a huge loss of money and perpetuated fears in EU countries. So this was problematic as well. So I came across similar debates covered in newspaper articles. First, there was, of course, the reporting of first cases, not only in Austria, but in Europe. Then we had the declaration of swine flu pandemic by the WHO. Then contracts with different pharmaceutical companies like Baxter, Novartis, GlaxoSmithKline. Then we had the competition between pharmaceutical companies. Then we had the number of necessary jabs, changing numbers in swine flu cases and deaths, and the targeted priority groups, then the vaccine leftovers due to a lack in public response, and the pandemic's case. These were all similarly covered in the 3 different countries. So I asked myself, okay, what is the role of WHO in this media coverage? Because as we've seen, WHO played a role in the information about the threat. So between 2003 and 2005, the WHO said that each European country should develop nationally adjusted influenza preparedness plans. And this process finished in 2005, as Debbie already said, but for Austria in 2006, it needed a bit longer. And the background was that since the 1990s, the WHO and experts believed in an increase of pandemics caused by zoonosis and suggested a thorough preparation and a community-based answer to such a threat. And a few ideas that they have were that the effective distribution of vaccines throughout Europe would play a decisive role, that media would play a prominent role as well, and the role of the media was even defined as well as the way in which media should present the information in the case of an epidemic or pandemic. And as a set of, Serbia had a plan ready in 2005, Great Britain also, and Austria in 2006. So I come to the distribution of vaccines suggested by the WHO in 2004 in a paper published by the Commission of the European Communities. And it says that the provision of estimates of the need for vaccines, antivirals and antibiotics from member states according to the likely scenarios for the use. Then it also said that determination of priority groups for vaccination when a vaccine is in short supply should also play an important role. Also the establishments of options for public health measures to minimize morbidity and social disruptions when there is rapid accumulation of cases of influenza. Also the collection of information from manufacturers about production capacities and plans for vaccines, antivirals and antibiotics would be important. And the community plan for coordinated production, distribution, and use of vaccines and antivirals. So I lined out some interesting notes, like content analysis, and I thought it would be interesting to look it up. This is a Commission of the European Communities working document on community influenza pandemic preparedness and response planning from 2004, and I found it interesting that they had an own communication act included, where they said, okay, it would be good to have a coordinated communication not only to the general public, but also to the media. And even at the threat level of 0 or first, it would be in considerable media interest. And it was important for them that reliable information would be available and that each country or each member state of the European Union, but also in Europe, would give out authoritative information at an early stage of a pandemic. And so that the creation of an information void that the media may fill with speculation and rumors would not be possible at all. And I will just skip some slides. And it was also important for them that they would avoid confusion and contradictory statements in media, so that's why they said, okay, it would be good to have one common communication plan for each country, and that that each country would decide which information material they would give out to the public as well. So I have a question or questions to the audience. Would you agree with WHO's assessments from 2004 concerning the probable side effects of unstrategic media coverage of a pandemic? Because media was defined as some kind of firing up speculations and rumors, confusion and contradictory statements. And was there a difference in newspaper coverage in the partner countries? And do you think that the media managed to give out the information about the H1N1 flu pandemic and the vaccines to the public worked? And did the WHO's strategic communication work in the case of influenza or the swine flu influenza? And was there transparency, for example, in highlighting the role of influenza preparedness plans in media communication to the public? Concerning the last question, I personally think that there wasn't, and I wanted to discuss with you if it would be better to be more transparent on the framework that works at the back and the framework declared by the WHO. So with these questions, I want to close, and maybe you can think about them if we have a discussion after the next presentation. So thank you very much for your attention.
You thought that you would be the ones asking the questions in the discussion session, but you weren't ready for Sophia. No, I'm kidding. Thank you, Sophia, very much for your interesting talk and comparative analysis, and thank you so much for coming to Belgrade. It is a pleasure to host you here. And now I will give the word to my colleague, Vladimir Nikolic, who will also facilitate the final discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexa. Just to start my presentation. Good afternoon to everybody joining us both here and online also. My name is Vladimir Nikolic and I work as a teaching assistant at Institute of Epidemiology, Faculty of Medicine at University of Belgrade, and also I'm finishing my PhD thesis on healthcare-associated infections in colorectal surgery. It's my privilege to bring our journey full circle today, and I will talk about equity in infection prevention and control, resource gaps, and how we can bridge these gaps. Before we dive deeper, let's just take a moment to define these three crucial terms. Healthcare-associated infections are infections acquired within healthcare settings, affecting not just patients, but also visitors and healthcare workers. Antimicrobial resistance is when microbes no longer respond to antimicrobials. And infection prevention and control, it combines science and practical solutions to protect everyone in healthcare settings from the risk of infections. When we talk about healthcare-associated infections, they are a deadly cause of harm. And the occurrence of healthcare-associated infections shows us a disparity. In high-income countries, 1 in every 10 patients will acquire this infection during their time in healthcare settings. This rate intensifies in low-income countries, where up to 1 in 5 patients are affected. And for instance, European estimates reveal that over 4 million patients are affected by approximately about 4.5 million episodes of healthcare-associated infections annually in Europe. Let's go now on a global tour, mini global tour of healthcare-associated infections. And this map not only highlights the differences in prevalence, but also the underlying inequities in global health. And turning our focus to Europe, let's compare prevalence in Austria, Serbia, and United Kingdom. Austria shows a prevalence of 4%, and Serbia closely behind at 4.3%. The United Kingdom presents a more complex picture, with England at 6.5%, above the European average. And just try to analyze this data from other perspective. First, no country is immune to healthcare-associated infections. And secondly, the battle against these infections is not uniform across Europe. Each country has a unique healthcare landscape, policies, and practices which significantly influence their prevalence rates. Why are they so important? The consequences of these infections can be diverse and very serious, from requiring a prolonged stay in hospital to long-term hospital complications and death. For the health system, the burden translates into added overload and costs. Now let's meet the usual suspects, and the microbes most frequently reported are Escherichia coli, Staphylococcus aureus, Klebsiella species, coagulase negative staphylococcus, and Acinetobacter species. Let's compare now most commonly reported microbes across Austria, Serbia, and United Kingdom. We can see that in Austria, the most prevalent pathogen is Escherichia coli, and the second is coagulase negative staphylococcus. In United Kingdom, pretty similar situation to Austria. Escherichia coli leads, and the United Kingdom also has a high prevalence of Staphylococcus aureus. But Serbia shows a significantly higher prevalence of Acinetobacter and Klebsiella species. And try again to analyze from another perspective. These figures aren't just numbers. They reveal us the unique microbial challenge each country faces, and understanding this helps us tailor our approach to battle these infections. So, what is the solution for healthcare-associated infections? We are facing mostly bacterial infections, as we can see, and we should be able to give antibiotics. It seems straightforward, and it seems that isn't a big problem. But we always have but. Here's where the plot becomes more complicated, and I'm introducing to you antimicrobial resistance. It's not just a simple challenge. It's better to say it's a crisis that threatens to dismantle the foundations of modern medicine, making the effective treatment of infections difficult. By the WHO, if we don't take action, antimicrobial resistance could result in 10 million deaths annually by 2050, and that's more than the number of people who die from cancer today. And we can see here resistance of bacteria we show that are more prevalent in our countries. Here you can see where fluoroquinolone and cephalosporin resistance in Escherichia coli is most prevalent, with darker shades marking the hotspots. And we can see that in Eastern and South Europe we have a greater resistance. Also, Klebsiella pneumonia resistance shows a concerning pattern, particularly in Eastern and Southern Europe. There is also a rise in carbapenem resistance among Acinetobacter species. This is particularly concerning in Serbia because Klebsiella and Acinetobacter are the most prevalent microbes, as we saw. And regarding Staphylococcus aureus, in some areas, methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus represents a significant portion of these infections. So, we start the healthcare-associated infection, which lead us to use antibiotics. This might seem like an immediate solution, but it's only part of the cycle. The rise, as antibiotics use intensifies, so does the risk of antimicrobial resistance. The rise in antimicrobial resistance strikes back, contributing to more difficult infections to treat, and which in turn require the use of even more potent antibiotics, repeating the cycle again and again and again. So the more we lean on antibiotics, the less effective they become. What drives antimicrobial resistance? Overuse and misuse of antibiotics in healthcare settings are well-known contributors of antimicrobial resistance, and there is a less visible but equally important factor at play, and it is agricultural practices. In agriculture, antibiotics are routinely used to promote growth and prevent disease in livestock. This widespread use of antibiotics creates a breeding ground for resistance, and resistant strains can be transferred to humans through direct contact or by just consuming animal products. Here we can see the importance of antimicrobial stewardship programs in agriculture as part of a One Health strategy, So we need a more holistic approach to battle antimicrobial resistance. Therefore, we can't rely on antimicrobials alone. The antibiotics are losing their power, and across Europe we have seen a significant resistance rates, and no country is immune to this threat. This is our collective problem because microbes don't know boundaries. Luckily, we have our powerful weapon against healthcare-associated infections and antimicrobial resistance, and it is infection prevention and control. By implementing effective IPC measures, we can stop this cycle before it starts, reducing the need for antibiotics and reducing the risk of antimicrobial resistance. IPC, I would say, it's a game changer in healthcare with the potential to reduce infection by 35 to 70%. This means better patient care, shorter hospital stays, and significant cost savings. Infection prevention and control consists from 8 components, and those are IPC programs, guidelines, education and training, surveillance, multimodal strategies, monitoring, audit and feedback, workload, staffing and bed occupancy, and last, built environment, materials and equipment. Where are we with the IPC implementation? Here we can see again global disparities. In 2021, 11% of countries still did not have an IPC program at all. The disparities are striking, while some regions, high-income regions mainly, exhibit robust IPC frameworks. Other areas lag behind with incomplete or absent national IPC programs. The disparity in IPC implementation is closely tied to a country's economic standing. For example, compared with low-income countries, high-income countries are 8 times more likely to have a more advanced IPC implementation status. From where to start, what measures to implement first? Simple but most effective single measure to reduce the transmission of pathogens and prevent infections within healthcare settings is hand hygiene. However, despite its proven efficacy, compliance with the hand hygiene recommendations remains suboptimal around the world. And we can see striking differences between high-income and low-income countries. The question is why? According to World Health Organization, almost 800,000 health facilities have water supply, sanitation, and hygiene services extremely poor. This means that 1.8 billion people are using health care facilities that lack basic water services, and 800 million are using facilities with no toilets. To achieve this universal coverage of basic water supply, sanitation, and hygiene services in health facilities in the least 46 developed countries will cost about $6.5 billion to $9.6 billion, and the cost represents about 0.43% of the combined military expenditure of the top 40 countries. So I think we need to question our global priorities. And worldwide annual investment of $1.3 billion for infection prevention would be needed. Without these investments, the World Bank models predicted that the losses would be about $30 billion. This would also imply returning to the pre-antibiotic era also. In particular, improving hand hygiene in healthcare settings could save about $16 in reduced healthcare expenditure for every dollar invested. And hand hygiene is not just best practice. It's a best buy for public health as an approach to reduce infections in healthcare settings and to reduce antimicrobial resistance also. How we can bridge the gap in infection prevention and control between high-income and low-income countries? It can be achieved through strengthening global health partnerships, enhancing access to resources, knowledge sharing and capacity building, supporting research and innovation, and implementing tailored IPC programs. As we mentioned earlier, there are so many differences across countries, so we need research to recognize them and to tailor IPC programs to specific requirements. Also, surveillance needs to be strengthened, and of course, we need political commitment and leadership. I also wanted to share with you 2 examples of how IPC can be, or infection prevention and control measures can be effectively implemented in countries with varying healthcare challenges. Those great examples are Ghana and Bangladesh. They used COVID-19 pandemic to implement programs and guidelines, antimicrobial stewardship programs, education, training, and so on. And in conclusion, I would say that our collective goal is clear: to establish effective IPC measures that can stand against the threat of antimicrobial resistance. But this goal is not within the reach of any single nation acting alone, because microbes don't respect national boundaries, we said. And while each nation, each country faces unique challenges, it's imperative that every nation tackles its own challenges. After all, equity in healthcare means providing each country with what it needs to overcome its specific health challenge, not a one-size-fits-all solution. And in the end, thank you for your attention, and those are take-home messages for you. Thank you again. Now I will open discussion for the last 3 topics. Do you have any questions? Maybe from the online. Oh, sorry.
Are there any ways or like organizations that could help provide this equality in healthcare? Like, I don't know, Doctors Without Borders, for example.
Yeah, there are organizations. First of all, the World Health Organization works on this problem, but it's not enough, and every country have to have influence of these problems, and we all have to question our priorities and to give more money to prevention and to especially infection prevention, and only collectively we can battle against antimicrobial resistance and healthcare associated infections.
And are there any like non-government or like voluntary associations that we could like support in any way, like financially, or I don't know, provide our own like volunteering work to support healthcare in our country, first of all, like not globally, but like
in our country for voluntary work, I don't know any organization to be honest, but I can just look if I can find. Globally, I think United Nations are the best example for volunteering and helping in many ways, and also in infection prevention control and healthcare, and also World Health Organization.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone else?
Hi, so I have a question for our colleague from London. How much responsibility do you think pharma companies should hold compared to governments about hoarding vaccines, getting lots of them, and then discarding of them after that?
I think this question is also open to yes, because because it's also a topic of public international law, I would say, in terms of responsibility. I mean, of course, pharmaceutical companies should also respect global health, like vaccines as global goods, but at the end of the day, they still serve as they're a company, right? They're here to make profit. I mean, we can't forget that. So who should we put the blame on is not, I mean, you know, it's a bit tricky to say pharma companies should also be responsible. But if you have something to add as well, Ivana and Fia.
Okay, so that's a very difficult question, mostly because if it were in the national situation, you would just say, oh, if someone was hoarding something, you would be like, this is unequal competition. It would be like, you would be able to solve it. However, because we have states, and we don't really have regulation that deals with international cooperation. We have regulation that does deal with international cooperation, but nothing specifically tying states. And this pandemic treaty is supposed to do that in a way. It's supposed to bring equality. However, it is stalling, and also the companies are still not actors, so you can't really sue them or make them do anything. Yeah, I'm still, I have no idea. I feel like the only way for that to happen is for this pandemic treaty to be signed. So you have a legal obligation, and therefore just like suing everyone basically, because unfortunately that's how it goes in human rights violation. If something doesn't work, you have to go to the top and build case law and then try to change stuff. You can also, I mean, are citizens from a global north countries really gonna complain if they have extra vaccines? I mean, it's also on them to try to fix some, you know, to try to fix things, because their money is going on those vaccines that are not being used, they're being hoarded. So that transparency is also very important in the whole process as well. Because as we said with Sophia, there were public debates of why are we buying so many vaccines when we're not gonna even use them? Why can't we just give those vaccines to people that need them? So a lot of questions are asked, but I feel like until something very specifically changes, we'll be in this sort of gap in between, like people who have power and are able to afford vaccines and those who can't.
And sorry, whoops. I would also like to add that the legal framework of WHO and the regulations published in 2005 are part of the problem, because they told each country to get vaccines by themselves. So this is part of the problem. And maybe the discussion is too superficial if we just, if we just concentrate on the pharmaceutical companies and the countries each country, because the framework is as it is, and the inequalities maybe in the framework. You should go to and tackle this framework and say, okay, how can we overcome national hoarding? And I don't know if the term hoarding is the right term at all, because the nations bought vaccines according to, you know, the amount of people living in the country, and maybe the hoarding just comes with lack of interest in vaccines and a failed vaccine program. So this is also part of the problem, and I think we should think it through from different directions. Thank you.
Okay, is this all right? Yeah. So I have a question about the vaccines. We are one of the countries that bought too many vaccines, and like there aren't people that are using them. why can't we just donate them to the countries that aren't as developed and that are not provided enough vaccines for their own citizens to use? Yeah.
Well, that is a question that we are asking. Why don't they do this? As I showed a few clippings, newspaper clippings, they just go to waste and they're not shared. I mean, that is also a bigger question that isn't happening. We don't see why it's not happening. But what was I going to say? Yeah, I forgot what I was going to say.
No, you don't have like any ideas how we could like find a solution to this. Like why?
So
why
there
isn't
is
it like talked about?
I mean, so there is the COVAX scheme. I'm sure maybe some of you have heard of. It's basically where, I mean, it's also similar to this donation, countries donating vaccines that will be distributed to other parts of the world. But I mean, yes, there's this issue of vaccines that are going to waste that could have been donated, but then there's also a bigger question of what does this also mean? Why are countries only, why must countries also rely on donated vaccines? Why are there some countries that are able to buy so many vaccines and other countries not? Why must they only rely on like the goodwill of these rich countries, for example? So it's, I mean, it's a bigger question, and it's a question that's still, that's being asked, of course. But yeah, there's probably no answer right now.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And we have one question from online audience. How can academicians play a role for equitable health system besides publication and conferences, targeting the leadership and unfair global strategies? I think that academia have a great responsibility and influence, and at first we should be louder addressing the problems, and we should take initiative in resolving problems, not only just mentioning, but that's the first step. We need to research the problem, to address the problem, and then to resolve the problem. So if anybody wants anything else to add?
I just wanted to say this is open to everyone, so also the audience, if they have some ideas.
I don't know if this is working. Oh, it is working. I think, what was I going to say? I think that we in academia need to be a little more up to date. So scientific research is now a way of communication, but it is not ideal, and it is not what the most people consume. So we need to be more flexible to maybe include podcasts as a way of broadcasting it to wider audiences. And there are some initiatives in that way, but I think the scientific community needs to get a bit out of its narrow scheme and go broader and try to cater to the audience, because so far it doesn't look like it's giving much effect what we are doing.
Anyone else maybe? No? Okay.
Also, I would like to add a bigger participation of the academic community in forming of national policy and implementing national policy, because and also a bigger role in civil societies as well. It feels like we're kind of stuck in just publishing papers sometimes, and that result just stays between a few people. As Alex has said, it needs to have a wider effect. So yeah, that's my proposition.
Thank you all. And now I would kindly ask you to fill the post-workshop questionnaire. You can scan this QR code, and also I will send you via email. Just a second.
And please, while Vladimir is sending, you just use the same email address you use for registration and for pre-test. It is very important for the certificate issuing. And thank you so much for taking your time and filling this questionnaire. It's a great help to us.
The certificates we will send in the next couple of days or maybe next week to all who completed both pre-test and post-test questionnaire. And registered, yes.
If you didn't register prior, you can do it now or after, but it's important that you do if you want the certificates.
Yeah, because to know your name. Yeah. we will have about 2 minutes more to finish your post test. In the end, to all participants, both in person and online, thank you for being a part of this workshop, and I hope you found this interesting. Additionally, a special appreciation to our professors who came today to support us, and to Faculty of Medicine for providing us the necessary facilities for today. And with this, I officially close the workshop. And thank you again, and sorry for the inconvenience at the beginning. Thank you.